thank you all for being here this morning. I've been fortunate actually to connect with many of you already throughout the project, and I'm excited to keep the conversation going, not only today, but also in the months to come. As Amy described, this work informs a broader conversation on infrastructure investment and workforce development nationally. The two go hand in hand, as you'll hear from me and several other speakers today, and the timing could not be more important, not only to repair our infrastructure, but also make sure that we have the skilled workers ready to fill all these jobs. Building off many previous studies we have done on the infrastructure workforce as a whole, our new research on the water infrastructure workforce looks at identifying and strengthening long-term pathways to economic opportunity, or to be more accurate, a long-term pipeline to opportunity. Have to get the pun in there. As you will see in here today, the water sector is emblematic of an enormous economic opportunity that infrastructure as a whole offers the country. This opportunity is not simply limited to creating a certain amount of jobs by investing in one given project, but it's about hiring, training, and retaining skilled workers to construct, operate, and maintain our infrastructure for decades to come. And ideally, these efforts are connected to the diverse communities served by utilities and other foundational infrastructure actors who you'll hear from in particular from our panel. And that serves as a basis for our report that was just posted last week. If you haven't already, I encourage you to check it out on the Brookings website. When you get the chance, you'll find a lot more detail, including regional specific data, and a long list of actionable workforce strategies. And special shout out to many of my Metro colleagues, including Annie Rice and Ranjitha Shivaram for helping with some of those visuals. So today, though, I'm going to cover three main parts of the report. First, the background and methodology, which help provide some additional context, the findings themselves, which look at employment, wages, education, and demographics, and finally, the implications and recommendations following from this analysis, which I think will serve as a good segue to the rest of our speakers. So as we turn to the background, I think it helps to start with a look not just at the water workforce challenge, but the water workforce opportunity. As the U.S. economy continues to grow, many communities are struggling to translate this growth into more equitable and inclusive opportunities for their residents. Persistent wage stagnation, income inequality, joblessness, all remain pressing concerns across the country. Meanwhile, many of the country's water infrastructure assets, as we all know, are in urgent need of repair or restoration. However, investing in infrastructure represents one of the timeliest ways for the country to support long-lasting pathways to economic opportunity for all workers across all skill levels across all regions. Naturally, this all starts with the question of who even are water workers. In short, the water workforce captures the wide range of workers who are directly involved in the construction, operation, design, and governance of the country's various water infrastructure systems. And I say water infrastructure as a shorthand to capture all the drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, and green infrastructure facilities throughout the country, which are crucially not just limited to utilities, which you'll see reflected in some of these following slides. So in other words, the water sector captures a vast array of industries and establishments, from engineering and design firms to material suppliers and contractors, underscoring the need to consider a broad suite of employment opportunities in utilities and beyond. And by doing so, we are able to define specific occupations filled by individual workers, allowing for a rich analysis informed by BLS data and other metrics. For example, whether employed as plumbers and pipe fitters, carpenters and welders, or as managers and analysts, water workers maintain the vast spectrum of water infrastructure that enters the space of our everyday lives. And they carry out a number of different activities as a result, whether installing, calibrating, and overseeing utility equipment, drafting plans, inspecting pipes, repairing wiring in buildings, or managing, analyzing, and supporting operations. As such, these workers embody many of the skilled trades, but also are involved in a variety of administrative, technical, and management positions too. So in short, water workers span multiple industries across the country, and utilities are not alone in hiring, training, and retaining these workers to oversee all the various infrastructure projects and facilities found across the sector. Rather, a wide assortment of employers, community partners, and national and state level actors each have roles to play in water workforce development. To provide drinking water, treat wastewater, manage stormwater, and balance other programmatic responsibilities, utilities depend on a skilled workforce. We know that utilities can vary markedly in the scale of their operations and workforce demands, but they still obviously assume a lead role onboarding and ultimately preparing workers to navigate long-term careers. Other water-related employers, including engineering firms, construction companies, and so on, are also actively involved in the lookout for workers to carry out specific water projects and activities. And of course, there are a vast assortment of community partners that educate, train, and assist workers interested in water careers. These include educational institutions, workforce development boards, unions and labor groups, and of course, a number of community-based organizations and nonprofit groups that ultimately provide the job readiness programs, transition services, and other channels of support to workers. Finally, since we're in Washington, I have to mention this, there are several national actors too that are involved in water workforce development, as we all know, from EPA to the Department of Labor, and many of you are in the room today, to industry associations, to environmental coalitions, to state departments of education, the list goes on. So as we turn to the actual findings, there are 4 total that I point to in the report and want to note today. First, in 2016, is just how many workers, as Amy described just a minute ago, how many workers are involved in the water sector, 1.7 million. And then just the range of different positions they fill, 212 different occupations according to our analysis, which, as you'll see, span a variety of industries and regions across the country. Again, water utilities represent one of the biggest employers in the water sector, but multiple other industries are crucial to consider as well. You can see here, water utilities employed about 298,000 workers in 2016, representing about 17.7% of the total water workforce. So in other words, utilities are part of a complex economic sector filled by a variety of other firms and establishments looking for skilled talent. I do want to point out, though, it's important to emphasize that utilities play a foundational role within the sector, since utilities control some of the most critical public infrastructure assets, as we know, in need of long-term operation and maintenance, and crucially are often located in some of the most disadvantaged communities nationally. They represent major anchor institutions in many ways. And the report digs into this point more, which I encourage you to check out, but I know our panel will probably dig into this issue too. Collectively, the water workforce fills 212 different occupations and carries out an enormous range of activities. These are just a couple examples here for you to just get a sense of some of these occupations, but plumbers rank as the largest water occupation overall, employing 324,500 workers, or almost 20% of all water workers nationally. Operating engineers employ nearly 80,000 workers nationally. And then in addition to the positions in the skilled trades, though, there are thousands of workers involved in administration, finance, and management, including, as you can see here, over 47,000 office clerks alone. Perhaps most importantly, though, water workers are not isolated to only a few areas across the country, but are employed everywhere, speaking to their enormous geographic reach in urban areas and rural areas. For instance, they consistently represent 1 to 2% of total employment in most of the country's metro areas. This map shows the country's 100 largest metro areas, where there are especially important job hubs for water workers, employing 1.1 million water workers by themselves, or almost 65% of the national total. Not surprisingly, they're led by places like New York and Los Angeles, just big labor markets overall, but also interestingly markets like New Orleans and Baton Rouge, which I imagine we'll hear more from Congressman Graves about in a few minutes. So as we turn to finding 2, we also see that water occupations not only tend to pay more on average compared to all occupations nationally, but they also tend to offer more equitable wages. In particular, they pay up to 50% more to workers at lower ends of the income scale. So on average, as you can see here, water workers earn higher wages compared to all workers nationally. These not only include higher paying occupations overall, such as lawyers, hydrologists, and general and operations managers, but also span a variety of other technical and financial positions. But I really want to emphasize here, if you look at the 10th and 25th percentile, these wage premiums continue to many workers at all types of wage levels, in particular those workers that are just beginning their careers. So as you can see here, water workers earn hourly wages about $14 and $17 an hour at those percentiles, compared to about $9 an hour and $11 an hour for all workers across all occupations nationally. In total, workers across 180 of the 212 water occupations, or more than 1.5 million workers, earn higher wages at both of these percentiles. And as you'll see in a second, many of these equitable wages go into occupations that have lower levels of educational attainment, which is a crucial consideration too. So furthermore, these equitable wages reach all types of areas nationally. You can just see here 2 examples. From Minneapolis to San Jose, water workers can earn as much as $9 more per hour, just the 10th percentile. And while several other factors such as cost of living need to be taken into account when comparing these differences across different regions, clearly water workers are gaining access to a variety of well-paying employment opportunities across the country. As I just briefly mentioned, many water workers have less formal education while earning competitive wages, which finding 3 describes in more depth. In fact, 53% only have a high school diploma or less. Put another way, while 32.5% of all workers across all occupations nationally have a high school diploma or less, a majority of water workers fall into this category, speaking to the lower formal educational barriers to entry. These include carpenters, welders, septic tank servicers, and sewer pipe cleaners, to name only a few. It's important to note, though, that there are still many highly educated water workers as well. While only 14.9% of them hold a bachelor's degree or higher, landscape architects, environmental engineers, computer systems managers, and others often have higher educational credentials and boast higher wages overall. Beyond education, what's important to note is that nearly all water workers tend to require some related work experience and on-the-job training, which highlight the need for applied learning opportunities. For example, 78% of water workers need at least 1 year of related experience, and that doesn't begin until they get into some larger occupations like water treatment operators that tend to need 2 to 4 years of experience. On top of this, almost 750,000 water workers, or 45% of them, need at least 1 year of on-the-job training. So in turn, as you would expect, many water workers often need familiarity with an enormous range of tools and technologies as part of their jobs, and it's not just about formal education, but actually applied learning on the job. Finally, water workers have higher levels of knowledge in a variety of different content areas, speaking to the wide range of activities they perform and the numerous transferable skill sets they develop over time in design, building and construction, STEM, and so on. What I want to point out here, though, is that water workers possess higher levels of knowledge in many of the same 11 content areas that other infrastructure workers do, who are employed in transportation, energy, and related industries. This is a crucial consideration for employers and other workforce professionals when trying to find and develop more skilled workers nationally. In other words, they should not just be looking at the water sector alone, but should be looking across the entire infrastructure sector. Which brings us to the last finding. Water workers tend to be older and lack diversity in certain occupations. As many previous studies have shown, thousands of water workers are aging and expected to retire from their positions in years to come. This is just one example for one occupation, right? Water treatment operators. There are more than 115,000 of them nationally, tend to be 46 years old at the median. That's more than 4 years older than the national median. But the challenge is not simply limited to an older workforce. In particular, there's a lack of younger talent in these jobs. So just 10.2% of all water workers are under the age of 24, compared to 12.5% of all workers nationally. So this is a crucial consideration when we think of the replacement needs and transfers happening, not only over the next decade, but the decades to come for this workforce. The water industry is also predominantly male, who represent 85% of the sector's employment, which I don't think is too much a surprise when you think of a lot of the skilled trades positions here. Women make up a majority of water workers in certain administrative positions, but clearly there is a lack of representation in many types of jobs across the sector when we think of mechanics, electricians, pipe layers, and others. In addition, there is a lack of racial diversity across the sector in specific occupations. So while nearly 2/3 of the water workforce is white, similar to the ratio found across all occupations nationally, Black and Asian workers in particular only make up about 12% of the water workforce compared to 18% of those employed in all occupations nationally. The Hispanic share, as you can see, is actually exceeding the national average across all occupations, but this is primarily due to their concentration in many construction related jobs. People of color in particular tend to be underrepresented in higher paying occupations involved in engineering or management. So in this way, the water sector offers a variety of pathways to more inclusive employment outcomes across a broad range of industries and occupations, across all types of markets, or offering competitive wages with lower educational barriers to entry. However, there are several challenges too. The water sector is struggling to attract and hold on to skilled talent. Equipping workers with needed skills and credentials is not always easy. And even those workers who are eligible and interested in water work cannot always navigate an inflexible, time-consuming hiring process to progress their careers. I won't go into each of these in great depth, but I'll say that in addition to an extensive literature review, my colleagues and I conducted 3 site visits, as Amy mentioned, to California's Bay Area, to Louisville, Kentucky, and Camden, New Jersey, along with an expert table in Washington, D.C., to look at clarifying these barriers across different regions throughout the country. So, for instance, a lack of public visibility combined with declines in career and technical education has reduced interest and experience among prospective workers who could fill water-related positions. Amy mentioned that one survey, but we know there's a silver tide of retirements where many of these workers entered the sector in sort of the hiring boom of the 70s, right, following the Clean Water Act passage and so on. And right now, right, we're seeing that many qualified workers in the sector are eligible for retirement, in some cases up to 50% for some utilities. A combination of hard skills and soft skills are essential for water workers to carry out their jobs. However, not all workers are gaining the needed education, experience, or competency in these skills, and in particular when it comes to the portability of credentials across not only different employers but across different states. It's a huge challenge, not just in the water sector but in the infrastructure sector as a whole. And even when students and other prospective workers demonstrate an interest in water careers, pursue needed education, and gain relevant experience, there can still be challenges hiring them and providing long-term growth opportunities. For example, depending on the particular region, many prospective workers, young and old, may lack job readiness, may remain out of work due to a criminal past, or may present a non-traditional background just in general, which employers may not have the time, resources, or programmatic flexibility to handle. Again, this is just a sample, but I'll say this: given the highly localized nature of water operations, capital planning needs, and labor demands, there are no one-size-fits-all strategies to address all of these recruitment challenges, which often spill over into the hiring process and the long-term retention of workers, as they look to not simply fill a job, but what I call a career in the sector. So in many ways, addressing the country's water workforce needs represents an aspirational moment where continued planning helps, but ultimately faster implementation is essential to drive new solutions. And to accomplish that, there needs to be a new water workforce playbook to accelerate thinking and action. Again, no single strategy or individual actor is going to lead these efforts, and some issues will be costlier and take longer to address. Rather than continually reflecting on what needs to be done, having a consistent and discrete list of action items can help utilities, other water employers, community partners, and national and state leaders begin to prioritize and launch solutions. You'll see there are 3 parts of this playbook, but these strategies are far from comprehensive. They're really more intended to serve as a guide for all types of communities and leaders to further customize depending on their specific needs and priorities. Some places might already be doing these actions, while others may have never considered them before, and I'm sure we'll hear more about this on the panel in particular. So to run through each of these, first, utilities and other water employers need to empower staff, adjust existing procedures, and pilot new efforts in support of the water workforce. Locally driven solutions, I think, and we say this through all our Brookings Metro work, I think are crucial, first and foremost, to help workers achieve the needed skills and identify the available pathways to securing greater opportunity. And these actions naturally start at the source, where utilities and other employers need to ultimately hire, train, and retain workers for themselves, but they should be a standard bearer, in my view, for the entire sector. Through a variety of internal programmatic changes, they can heighten awareness of the water workforce opportunity and further prioritize action around faster hiring, more flexible training, and more predictable retention. So this leads to many of the action items you can see here. I won't go into all of them because it would take way too much time, but I'll just go through a couple of them that I think are relevant to consider. So, conducting more extensive public outreach and hiring a more diverse set of prospective workers, I think, requires a long-term commitment to balancing infrastructure and facility budgets with ultimately the workforce demands of the employer. So succession planning is crucial in this respect, but so is a more detailed accounting and measurement of labor demands, which utilities like the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission are pioneering in conjunction with other Bay Area utilities as part of an effort known as Baywork, which I highly recommend you check out if you haven't already. Likewise, it is critical that prospective workers, including other students and non-traditional candidates, like veterans, for example, have flexible opportunities to become familiar with the work and the types of opportunities available in the water sector. To do so, employers should design and launch new bridge programs, including short-term immersive experiences that we like to call boot camps, to provide ways for younger workers and other non-traditional workers to explore water careers and gain that needed experience. So through its Green Job Summer Ambassadors program, for example, Camden has sought to create a quick way to introduce high school students to green and water-related careers, which I'm sure Andy on the panel will bring up. So second, a broad range of employers and community partners need to hold consistent dialogues, pool resources, and develop platforms focused on water workers. Many localities and utilities are driving new workforce solutions, but there needs to be continued dialogue and shared learning via stronger community partnerships. In other words, to reach more prospective workers, all types of community partners and employers, not just utilities, need to sit at the same table. Educational institutions, workforce development boards, unions, and a range of organizations all have a role to play here, and it's critical for communities to keep stretching the tent to capture more partners and act more collaboratively. And without this coordinated leadership and action, in my view, I think it'll be difficult to achieve scale across a sector that can be highly fragmented and localized in its operations. So again, I won't go through all of these, but the creation of new community platforms to encourage additional regional collaboration, planning, and action needs to be the norm, not the exception. As just one example, having a specific point of contact or a regional organization to coordinate these actions helps, but so does having a clear space and opportunity to gather together in a public-facing way. Holding an annual water summit or meet and greet where prospective workers, employers, and community partners can connect with one another regionally would mark a step in the right direction, which the Louisville Metropolitan Sewer District has done through its annual Can You Dig It event, which just has an awesome name, too. In addition, similar to regional efforts already underway for manufacturing and healthcare led by workforce development boards, there should be an effort focused on infrastructure and the skilled trades, as you can see in the academy concept referenced. DC Water, for instance, is working with several other employers regionally as part of a newly launched DC Infrastructure Academy, which I'm sure some of you have heard of, a new platform that is supporting more portable infrastructure education, training, and credentials. And finally, national and state leaders need to provide clearer technical guidance, more robust programmatic support, and targeted investments in water workforce development. So I somewhat intentionally left this last, right, because it's kind of building up from the bottom up. So utilities employers cannot act alone when addressing their workforce demands, and broader regional collaborations are not going to solve all these issues either. National and state leaders need to provide greater capacity and support for all these locally driven efforts. So federal agencies, including EPA, DOL, USDA, the VA, and others are already playing their part in related workforce development programs. And several national groups, including water industry associations and others, are remaining active in this space. State-level groups, too, including labor and education departments, must also remain closely attuned to water workforce needs. However, many of these actors need to provide improved technical and programmatic assistance, and in some cases, I think targeted additional investments in training and skills development would be helpful. So the action items listed here aim to make progress on that front. Just a couple examples to go through. So, first, many utilities and workforce development groups have expressed a frustration, I think, at the lack of consistent or comprehensive information concerning best practices in water workforce development, or as I like to say, a menu of options. In particular, they struggle to identify the common ingredients that make this menu possible. So in other words, what specific actionable steps can all types of places follow to get started? So national leaders, in my view, are strategically positioned to bring greater consistency and direction to the water workforce, including certain dialogues, considering reforms to certification programs, and forming templates ultimately for future action. We're already seeing this through the National Green Infrastructure Certification Program, through WEF, and then several other partner organizations, and then of course the National Rural Water Association's Water Pro apprenticeship program. So this is an issue not just touching urban areas, but also rural areas too. So similarly, federal leaders should make it easier for utilities and other eligible entities to use funding in more nimble, flexible ways to support workforce development. Indeed, offering additional flexible support for smaller utilities and jurisdictions would be particularly helpful in this way, and helping support more nascent, innovative training programs, such as the Water Bootcamp idea before, I think would be welcomed even beyond existing programs that could use additional support. So we've seen this right through the state revolving funds, for example, but also those focused on apprenticeships and others that I know are currently up for debate in Congress. So in other words, there needs to be an acknowledgement of the varying scale of the water workforce challenge, opportunity, and response, which should be a central concern at a national level, not just a regional level. So with that, I think I may have take a question. Yeah, that's what I got. So if any questions, I'm happy to take them. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Congratulations on your report. Your presentation was phenomenal. But I'm old enough to find even more phenomenal that you went all the way through a presentation on water and infrastructure and jobs and never said the word union. And I don't know about
I think I did very quickly,
everybody
though.
else, but I
was trying to get through a lot.
I'm from New York City, and I think you can go through every other municipal concentration of the jobs you're talking about, and each and every one of them is very closely managed by very strict unions who control who gets hired and who doesn't, and is probably a big part of the reason your gender numbers are the way they are, and your diversity numbers are the way they are, and your pay scale numbers are the way they are, and who's a clerk and who's not is the way they are. So that's one question. And another quick question is, I just wanted to know, are Department of Interior, Army Corps of Engineers, those sort of jobs included in there?
Yeah, so the first one, absolutely. I think I said it probably in 1 second, but it should have been more than that. So yes, absolutely, unions and labor groups are central to these conversations. They are probably, right, affecting some of the data that we are seeing. It's hard to isolate, right, those effects, just given the limitations, at least in public data sources that at least we used for this report. It's certainly an area of interest, I know, for myself and colleagues, right, looking into this issue as we, right, keep getting deeper, diving deeper, whatever you want to call it. So yes, and I think, and I think on the site visits in particular, talking to many of the utility folks and other workforce leaders, right, this is an issue, right, that in many cases, right, and I didn't get into the example in the sort of the utility sort of employer-driven part, but job classifications even, for example, right, job classifications were developed in some cases 20, 30 years ago, right, often hand in hand with labor groups for a good reason, right, to provide an opportunity for workers to learn on the job, right, and so on. But perhaps, right, as we think of changing technologies, perhaps as we think of changing skill sets, if we're trying to reach more workers, maybe there needs to be some revisiting, right, to how we're defining those jobs, defining sort of the pathways by which workers actually are accessing these opportunities. So yeah, I mean, I go on about that, but I think you're right. The second bit on water resources kind of and broader sort of wetlands, coastal restoration, and those sorts of jobs and being boats.
And damming and levee construction.
Right. Right. So sort of the same reason it's hard to isolate that in the data, but without going through the whole methodology, which is way too long, I encourage you to check out the report where we do have a breakdown for each of the individual industries that we used to ultimately classify the occupations, and so within those industries, right, we do include some of those activities.
So we're here in Washington. So what would be a good central place for the federal government to have a reaction to these policy suggestions you have? Is this something that should happen at Commerce, Labor, EPA? Is there a natural home to kind of address these core issues you've identified?
Yeah, it's a great point. So it was kind of another point that I glossed over among many of those icons you saw in that national sort of bit. But you're right. I mean, there are many different agencies that I think have a role to play here. I think there are many folks on the Hill that have a role to play here. Bipartisan, right? It's not just, I think infrastructure investment and workforce development is something we can all kind of agree on, I would hope. But the problem is, I think, coalescing and right, kind of aggregating that action into a cohesive whole so actually something can get done. So we're not just continually talking, right, spinning our wheels, right, just talking about what should be done, but actually doing something. And I think we're already seeing this to some extent, right, in some of these agencies, right, when we're talking about apprenticeships, when we're talking about, right, even on the Hill, right, I know apprenticeships have come up there as well. But one idea that I think would be powerful, even as, and it doesn't take a lot of money, really, right, is having even consistent points of contact across these agencies, right? So I know in EPA, right, there's an office of drinking water, there's an office of clean water, right, and very much sort of sliced by sort of the regulatory sort of framework we have in place. But I know that many of those offices are already thinking about this, of trying to assign specific program staff to think about these issues. The VA, I know, has done this in the past. USDA, right, as we're thinking of rural issues, is thinking about this. So is there a way that we can collect, right, these federal actions together? One idea we had is creating a water workforce council, right? So, and I want to say it's not just federal. I think it's crucial that there are national organizations here too. So if we're just, right, looking at water, I think we're missing a big part of the equation in terms of workforce groups, skills coalitions, and then even perhaps, who knows, other infrastructure sectors too. I think that should be at the table. One more? Yeah, I can hear you.
Just curious, the 1.7 million number include a little further upstream, I guess, so to speak, the folks who are manufacturing the pipes or all the infrastructure, I suppose, in the water world?
Right. So, without burying everyone in other reports we've done. So this report actually builds off a lot of the methodology that we use for other infrastructure workforce reports. And so when we say it's literally the construction, operation, maintenance, design, right, that kind of, not to say that those manufacturing workers aren't important, they are, but at a point you do need to bound, in my opinion, especially when I think it comes to the infrastructure conversation, right, of, the country has obviously certain issues in terms of construction and new infrastructure, but we're at a point of a lot of operation, maintenance, restoration. And so I think emphasizing that part, right, so it's not just, the creation of sort of the shiny new object and, right, the ribbon cutting ceremony, and then kind of we create so many jobs from that, right, but actually focusing on this longer term conversation, right, so it's not multiplier effects, it's not direct, indirect, induced jobs, right? But it's actually talking about the workers themselves, what pathways they need to access opportunity here. So I think that's why I think we focus probably, at least in our definition, more on that operation and maintenance aspect. But for sure, I think manufacturing is certainly relevant. I know even in like transportation, right? That's something to consider. One more? Keep adding on.
Yeah, thank you. I see you're addressing the skilled trades, but at the Water Research Foundation, we've also looked at skills of the future, where we have identified what the utility of the future is going to look like.
Yeah.
And steps we've taken, in addition to a report we did last year, we're going to hold some workshops later in the year where we're going to look at industry, water sector, strategic workforce development planning, and employee value propositions. So that's taking the next step, especially the value proposition, where you're going to be looking at what the utility offers their employees and what the employees can expect in return. So that's where we're headed.
Absolutely, yeah. That's there's only so much you can cover, even in, I think our report came out to 72 pages. Awesome. But yes, that is, and it goes beyond the water sector too, right? I mean, it's certainly an area of, I think, inquiry and fascination, right, for all workforce practitioners at the moment.
Against Amazon and Google for some of these skilled positions, and even the tradespeople are going to have more access to technology, which will allow them to do higher value work. So it's
yes. Well, and the prospect of automation, right, and even just changing technologies within utilities, for example, right, that's changing the nature of the work, right, and so are we providing not just the platforms for new workers entering the sector, but even existing workers, retraining efforts, right, as we think of, again, not just the job, but the career, right? So we're talking 20, 30, 40 plus years, right, which is a long time, particularly relative to technology.
right. And then you're also looking at the different generations in the utilities as well, going from the baby boomers to Generation Z, and how do you manage these different types of workforce issues?
Right, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.